and B form a relationship, because the relationships are not necessarily formal. That people generally get into a relationship long before they know they're in a relationship. You know, and that there's a certain level of connectedness that occurs according to the level of differentiation. The more highly differentiated people are, the more that they connect as two separate people, and that the system that evolves in relationship to the connections, it's A and B, occurs, but it takes a greater level of intimacy before the system gets engaged. And by system, it means that A and B, prior to that level, can function as if they're two separate independent beings. When the system gets engaged, that A and B start functioning to some extent as a dimension of C, it's a dimension of the system, and that they are no longer functioning as two separate independent beings, but they're functioning as two separate independent beings on some level, and on some level as a dimension of the system itself. And the more differentiated people are, the less active this will be, and the more that they can function as a dimension of C, of the system, and maintain the capacity to function as two separate beings. The less differentiated they are, the more that C will take over, and that they will function as a dimension of this. And the anxiety that occurs, that co-occurs with the presence of the system, gets managed through distributing the anxiety to correlate reciprocal outside points. To some extent, it'll be managed within the relationship, but to some extent, it'll be managed by pulling the anxiety along to outside points, so that the anxiety, which is the same level, now gets distributed and becomes dependent on the stability of these activities here. So that, for instance, the husband, as this develops, the husband will be more involved at work, and the wife will be more involved with her mother, with her religion, whatever. It's not relevant what the things are. So that they can be calm, but the calmness is not based on differentiation, it's based on balance. And that so therefore, the specifics, while not relevant, the specifics become a dimension, a dimension of this process. So that in some sense he's not at work, in some sense this process is here. And that the emotional process gets extended to this. So that he's at work to some extent because he's at work, and to some extent because it's a distribution point for the anxiety. So that when this jiggles, this will jiggle.
Arthur, a little bit of a stretch, but you're talking about your upcoming presentation at Gateway, and I was thinking about the alcoholic as the alcoholic's or drug addict's use as an effort for family regulation, as in addition to self-regulation.
Oh yes, exactly.
And then recovery and subsequent involvement in AA is a typical course of action, and have thought about how does the involvement in AA replace the balance point of the addiction.
Yeah, and in that regard,
connection.
Martha, it's intriguing that if one thinks about therapy as a balance point, that the anxiety rises here, then the husband goes into therapy and creates a connection here which balances this. So that this process here is not so much about working on issues, but the presentation of issues is needed on some level. Remember, this is intuitive. The presentation of issues on some level is needed in order to maintain this connection, to balance this. And this is, I think what happens is you get institutions like, there'll be PIC and other places that, in a sense, live in order to provide balance here. And in order to maintain the connection, this person has to be symptomatic. So that the symptom, while it's seen clinically as a process of the individual, the symptom is a process of making the connection in order to provide the balance here, which provides the balance here. So that the currency of the connection, which distributes the anxiety here, is symptom.